Constitution and need for law. The Indian Constitution is a legal document which contains basic laws that define the powers and functions of the government. It is on the basis of the provisions contained in the Constitution that the governance of the country is carried out. It also enumerates the rights and duties of the citizens. Every government has to function according to the laws laid down in the Constitution. Constitution of India was put into force on 26 January 1950. The Constitution gives us information about the composition of the government. It describes in detail the different organs that comprise the government, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. It also specifies how each organ of the government is composed and mentions the functions that it must perform. At the same time, it protects people from any injustice of the state by imposing certain limitations on the powers of the government. So, it performs dual functions of regulating the government as well as safeguarding the rights of the citizen. The need for law. No civilized society can lead a peaceful life unless its people of society abide by the rules and regulations. Laws are important for the smooth running of the society and for establishing peace and order in the state. Customs adopted by the society, when followed regularly, become permanent and take the form of law. Those principles which were found useful and were applied regularly were recognized as law. But if you look around, you will notice that there are many people who suffer due to certain unjust social practices, such as caste system and untouchability. There was no reasonable explanation to justify such practices, which led to acts of atrocities being committed against certain people. When people show the lack of will to change, the government has to take initiative to force the change in order to implement the provisions of the Constitution. Any such social and religious customs that hampers the progress of the society and country must be removed at the earliest, otherwise it will destroy the social structure and hinder national progress. To curb the evil practice of giving and taking dowry during marriages, the Dowry Prohibition Act 1961 was passed. According to this act, the act of taking and giving dowry is a crime. Anyone who is found guilty is to be fined and imprisoned for a period of not less than 5 years. Dowry is the money or gift given to the daughter at the time of marriage by her parents. Ideals before our nation. The making of the constitution of a country is inspired by certain ideals which are included in the preamble of our constitution. The word preamble literally means an introduction to a legal document. The Indian Constitution opens with the words, "We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic." The preamble lays down basic principles and reflects the ideals which the rulers of our country should always keep in mind while formulating and implementing national policies. The preamble thus reflects the spirit of the Constitution. It also shows that people of India are the real authority. A brief description of the words given in the preamble is mentioned here. Sovereignty. After independence, India has become a sovereign state. It means that India is no longer subject to any external power. India is free to follow any kind of policy it wants in its relationship with other countries of the world. No outside power can interfere in the internal affairs of our country. Secular. The word secular implies that all Indians have the freedom to profess, practice, and propagate any religion they like. The state has no official religion of its own and does not discriminate on the basis of religion. Socialist. Ours is a socialist state, which implies that the state policies should be designed so as to serve for the welfare of the people as a whole. It tries to redistribute the wealth of a country in such a way that everyone can get at least the minimum to lead a decent life. Suitable restrictions should be imposed on rich people, and the interest of poor and weaker sections of the society should be safeguarded. Republic. A republic is a state where the head of the state is a popularly elected person. The president is the highest executive authority of the land. Democratic. We have adopted a democratic form of government. It signifies that the state derives its powers from the people. People vote their government to power on the basis of universal adult franchise. People control their government and can also remove it from power if they are unhappy with it. All adult people of the country take part in elections which are held after every 5 years. Fundamental rights. The Indian Constitution guarantees 6 fundamental rights to its citizens, which are mentioned in Part 3 of the Constitution of India. These rights enjoy a special status. If any of these rights is violated, a citizen can approach either a High Court or Supreme Court. These courts have the power to ensure that fundamental rights taken away from people are restored to them. Right to equality. The Constitution declares all citizens equal in the eyes of law. It does not discriminate people on grounds of caste, religion, race, sex, or place of birth. However, the government has made special provisions like reservation of seats to protect the weaker section like scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward communities. Titles have been abolished and untouchability has been declared an offence which is punishable according to law. Right to freedom. The Constitution guarantees 6 types of freedom to its citizens. They are freedom of speech and expression, freedom to assemble peacefully and without arms, freedom to form associations and unions, freedom to reside or settle in any part of the country, freedom to move freely throughout the territory of India, freedom to practice any profession and carry on any occupation, trade, or business. Sometimes the government can impose certain restrictions on their right in the national interest so that it does not affect the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security of the state, and public order and morality. Protection is also provided to people who have been convicted. People are also safeguarded from arbitrary arrest and punishment. Right against exploitation. This right prohibits illegal trafficking of human beings, child labor, and forced labor. These acts are considered an offence and are punishable in accordance with the law. This right also prohibits employment of children in factories. No child below the age of 14 years can be made to work in factories or mines or any other hazardous employment. Right to freedom of religion. The Constitution has declared India as a secular state. Constitution makers realize the need for every religious community to feel free to practice their religion. The Constitution prohibits the imparting of religious instructions in schools run by the state or recognized by the state. No tax can be imposed on the people for religious purposes. Every religious group has the right to establish institutions for religious and charitable purposes and to manage their religious affairs. Cultural and educational rights. In a multicultural country like India, where each community has its distinct language and culture, the Constitution has guaranteed the right of each community to promote and preserve its culture. Minority communities have the right to set up their own educational institutions. Right to constitutional remedies. The Constitution guarantees the right to constitutional remedies if any of the fundamental right is violated. In such cases, citizens of India have the right to go to the court if they feel that their fundamental rights are violated. The court defends the citizens' rights except during emergency when a person's fundamental rights can be suspended. Fundamental duties. It shall be the duty of every citizen of India to abide by Constitution and respect its ideals and institutions, the national flag and the national anthem. to cherish and follow the noble ideals which inspired our national struggle for freedom, to uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India, to defend the country and render national service when called upon to do so, to promote harmony and the spirit of common brotherhood amongst all the people of India, transcending religious, linguistic, and regional or sectional diversities, to renounce practices derogatory to the dignity of women, to value and preserve the rich heritage of our composite culture, to protect and improve the natural environment including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures, to develop the scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform, to safeguard public property and to abjure violence, to strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity so that the nation constantly rises to higher levels of endeavor and achievement. Changes in the Constitution. Our Constitution was prepared by the Constituent Assembly, which had representatives from different communities. The Constitution was brought into force on 26 January 1950. Since then, many things have changed in India. The Constitution, too, has to adapt to these changes. As a result, it has to be amended, a process whereby a change can be brought about in the Constitution is mentioned in the Constitution itself. Changes in the Constitution are made through a process called amendment. Laws and dissent. Mostly, laws are good because they aim at the welfare of the people. Though the legislature is elected by the people, it does not mean that all laws passed by it are in the interest of the people. So, there is always a spirit of dissent underlying a bad law. During the British rule, several unjust laws were passed by the government. For example, the Vernacular Press Act tried to put restrictions on the vernacular press and newspapers. Similarly, the British, in order to establish their monopoly, imposed a salt tax in India, which dictated that the sale or production of salt by anyone but the British government was a criminal offence punishable by law. The burden of this tax fell upon the poor people. In order to violate the salt law, Gandhiji started the famous Dandi March in 1930 from his ashram at Sabarmati. He made salt from the seawater at Dandi and violated the salt law. At his call, people began to defy laws and orders of the government. There were hartals, strikes, and demonstrations all over the country. This was the beginning of the civil disobedience movement. The right to express disagreement with a widely held view is permitted in a democratic country. In fact, dissent is a part and parcel of a democracy. That is why there exist opposition parties in every democratic country. Another example of dissent is anti-liquor campaign. Consumption of alcohol is a major social problem. Instead of improving their living standards, people spend their money on liquor. It leads to violence and other anti-social activities. In order to curb it, the government has included prohibition of liquor as a part of directive principles of state policy. Some states like Gujarat have imposed prohibition on liquor in their state. However, passing of a law does not necessarily mean that issues related to it are realized. Society should take a strong stand on such socially relevant issues. The role of media is also important in arousing public consciousness. The Government of India has passed several laws against dowry, untouchability, and similar other ill practices. But this does not mean that the acts are always effective. The ideals before our nation can only be realized if the vision of a strong and united India is engraved in the hearts of all Indians.